Ladies and gentlemen, at this time I'd like to announce or have a special guest that will be joining us momentarily, Mr. Alexander Alex Billinis. He's a resident of Clemson, South Carolina, and a lecturer at Clemson University in the Political Science Department and at the Clemson Honors College, where he also coordinates the prestigious Dixon Fellows Program. He and his wife also own a commercial real estate company in Salt Lake City, Utah, and residential properties in Chicagoland and South Carolina. He's studying for a doctorate in digital history part-time at the history faculty of Clemson University, where he also earned a master's degree in history this past December. His master's thesis was on the Greek merchant marine. He holds a Juris Doctor degree from the American University in Washington College of Law and is licensed to practice law in Illinois and Utah. Previous career experience includes doing freelance legal work, journalism, and 12 years working for various global banks in Salt Lake City, Chicago, Athens, Greece, and in London in the UK. He's a proud Utah native. Alex is a U.S. and Greek citizen, and he speaks 7 languages. He has a lifelong passion for Byzantium and Balkan history and the history of the Greek and Serbian diasporas, having lived and worked in Greece, Bulgaria, and Serbia. He's married to Vilmasari Billinis, originally from Serbia, and they have a son in college in Charlotte and a daughter in high school. He's also active in several Greek-American, Greek diaspora academic and community forums. He is particularly passionate about his ancestral land, Idra, and its nautical history. He is an honorary alumnus of the Idra Nautical Academy Alumni Association, vice president of the Idra American Society Miaoulis, and a director of the East Mediterranean Business Culture Alliance, AMBICA, and he's on the National Board of Orthodox Christian Laity. And we're coming up on 9:30 in the morning, and you are tuned to Grecian Echoes here on WNTN, 1550 AM in Cambridge, Needham, and Boston. We're streaming at WNTN.com on this Monday, March 4th, 2024. It's Mondays with Meleti, and your host, Meleti Pouliopoulos, here with you all morning. Kalimera, Alex.
Kalimera.
Thank you for calling in.
I was having technological issues.
Oh, I can relate to those, believe me. That's the story of my life.
So, I guess I'm on Greek time. I am ready to rock. And again, apologies to all for the delay. I will chalk it up to technical issues, but maybe it reflects an ethnic penchant for being late. I should have had a Murphy's Law solution as well. That's why we have hotspots, right? So my bad.
That's so funny. Well, this morning I was a friend of mine called, and he said I was announcing that it was Wednesdays. You know, I was basically thinking of the Wednesday lineup. So my days are all mixed up, but I'm so glad that you joined us. I did read your bio on the air, and we'll be referring to it. And I wanted to ask you, you know, since this is we saw on Facebook where we met, actually, and found out that we have mutual passion and friends and common interests, I should say, in our Greek-American heritage. And I was pleased to find out that you had grown up at Salt Lake City, Utah. Can we bring you back to those days, and can you talk about what it was like growing up in a Greek-American community?
Well, okay. So I was born in '69 from my father was directly from Greece. He was from the 1950s immigrant wave. I mean, he wasn't exactly your typical immigrant in that he was like so many from that era, particularly from an islander background, were Hydriots. He was a sailor, but he met a relative in Salt Lake City. His uncle, his paternal uncle, was actually a sheriff in Salt Lake City, and then he met a nice Greek girl, my mother, and decided to stay in the United States. So he became a naturalized citizen, I think in 1958, had 3 children, but my mom's family goes back to just before the Balkan Wars in Utah. So I'm kind of, I guess, first and a half generation, depending on how you do the math. But the Greek community in Utah was, I actually just posted an article I wrote a few years ago about the Greek community. The Greek community was interesting in that it was tight knit. It was kind of a parallel universe with the at that time, it was a substantial LDS majority that was also very religiously and culturally oriented. So we had, ironically, a lot of things in common with our Mormon neighbors, where religion and identity played a very, very strong role. I can't say that that the relations were always perfect, but they were generally, I think, based on mutual respect. But at that time, you still had a very, ethnically Greek and church-oriented community, which, I mean, the community is still very vibrant, but now it's obviously a lot more diverse. There are a lot more converts. And for example, the church that is primarily non-Greek speaking and converts is growing rapidly, whereas some of the more, one of the more ethnically oriented churches, which I tend to go to when I'm there, isn't necessarily growing. So Salt Lake City has become very much a global city. But I remember it when it was still, a mid-sized American town. And we were we were a distinct community, but one that, that was very proud of itself and its identity.
Where are most of the people from from the Salt Lake City immigrants? Where would you say most of the people are from in Greece?
Well, I think that that probably, near a half, at least, if I go back to the community circa 1980, nearly half were from Crete, and they're very proud Cretans, and they should be. Crete is a fantastic island, absolutely wonderful island, and they're very, very proud of their Cretan identity and, of course, their Greek identity. There were also, as one might expect, a large Peloponnesian contingent, particularly from Achaia, which is where my mother's people are from. And then, a smattering of Nisiotes, Macedones, Epirotes, but it was very much an immigration from what we would call Palya Elada, pre-Balkan Wars, and Crete. If that gives you kind of a picture.
Yeah, and what was did you have a radio program out there? What was the glue in the community?
There were radio programs. There was music. I can think of one of the Greek school teachers now. He's now much older, but he was born in Greece, and he was the guy with all the Greek songs on the radio, and he was the guy to get any sort of music or records from. Yes, so there was. And there were restaurants that people would go to. There were certainly clubs. The Minos Club from Crete, for example, was very strong. Right. And in Utah, in Salt Lake, we had 2 churches. Now there's 3. There was one in the town of Ogden, which was basically a railway depot, and then in Price, Carbon County, where you had particularly miners, coal miners. The name of the county is called Carbon County. So they're very, they were very much in the, into mining. Now that community is a lot smaller. Now a lot of people have moved into Salt Lake, but there's still, there's a lot of heritage over a century in Utah that I think Utah Greeks are very proud of and should be.
Did you, growing up, when we spoke the other night, I was so pleased to hear that you were familiar with the Hellenic Chronicle newspaper. Were you receiving that out there?
I believe my father was a subscriber. I mean, my father subscribed to all of the Greek media, whether it was in Greek or English. He believed that you had to contribute into the coffers of the community for certain things. So he certainly did do that.
Your father was an archon, and he was one of the very active people in the community. Was he at the Holy Trinity at the cathedral, right there, or?
He was actually not there as much as at Prophet Elias. His generation helped to set up Prophet Elias church, along with people of his generation. My papu's generation were more the ones who set up Holy Trinity. So, as a matter of fact, both my papudis and yayadis are on the cornerstones of Prophet Elias.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting. I've not been there. I have been to the Holy Trinity Cathedral and to the basement where there was a little museum that was started up. I don't know if you had been down there in recent years, but Helen Z's Papa Nicholas she had started it, I guess, or was her vision. And so there was so much history there. Just incredible. And now, fast forward. Now you're living in South Carolina, and you held a career, as I had informed the audience, in banking, and you had worked both in Utah and then Chicago and Athens, Greece, and in London. And so you lived and worked abroad, which is fascinating. I also had quoted from your bio that you speak 7 languages.
Yes.
Which languages do you speak? I'm curious.
Well, okay, so English and Greek. And I speak German to a proficient business level. I speak Spanish. I speak Serbian.
Okay, your wife is Serbian. Yeah,
I speak Hungarian and Bulgarian. Now, Hungarian and Bulgarian, I'm much weaker on that.
Did your love of the languages start at an early age, or did it come out of when you were working internationally in business? Just curious.
Well, let's put it this way. I think that part of the reason that I became so interested in it is, I grew up with 2 languages. 2 languages were spoken in the house. I also remember going to Greece and meeting, some old timers who were Greeks from Egypt, or Greeks from Asia Minor, who spoke multiple languages, and my father had kind of said that this is a sign of culture, and I thought that was important. And if you look at the Greek, particularly the Greek commercial diasporas of the 17th century, they would often, grow up with 4 or 5 languages. When I just felt that it was, if you can communicate in another person's language, it's a great sign of respect, and it also provides for a great deal of versatility. And I just kind of took that in, and later life, I operated on that by learning languages. Most of them self-taught, so grammatically, I slaughter most of the languages I speak. But the point is to show respect,
right,
for people in their own language. I think that is something that is, it's really a lost art.
Now,
So,
I understand that you're a lecturer at Clemson University in the political science department.
correct.
What sort of things do you lecture about? Contemporary issues or?
Well, okay. It's interesting. I've got probably the greatest remit that anyone could ever ask for at my job. My home is in the political science department, but I also teach in the honors college, and a lot of my classes are on culture and technology. How, change over time. How do we adjust to changes in technology? How do these adjust to the culture? So, and my political science classes are basically American government, particularly with particular emphasis on founding documents of the United States. So my work as a university lecturer has nothing to do with Greece. But of course, I strongly believe that as Americans, we can impart our values very well into the larger culture. And anecdotes, certainly my experiences living abroad, living in Greece, living in Serbia, living in the UK, then shorter stints in Bulgaria or Germany or Chile are an opportunity for me to bring insights from elsewhere into the discussion. On the other hand, I finished a master's degree in history at the Clemson History Department, where my major was on the Greek Merchant Marine, and now I'm working on a PhD part-time on the whole issue of the Greek cotton merchants and their role in the global cotton trade, which is, again, very much an American story, but really off the radar of contemporary Greek America.
Yes, certainly. There's so much. I think that's one of the links that we have as scholars and researchers of Greek American heritage here, history. So much of it's been lost or is just not being taught or not being preserved, and it really is a battle. I had read in your bio that you were studying for digital history part-time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
but what exactly is that?
Well, look, we live in a software-defined world. We live in a digital world. And research and presentation in the humanities need to reflect that as well. And I think that is what the digital history program is aiming to do. We're very fortunate in that we have some alumni who are professors, including one who I just adjusted a meeting for in order to do this class. But she's an absolutely brilliant professor who, is empowering us with the power of coding to find information that only computers can find. So text searches can reveal patterns that the human eye can't do. So there's an opportunity to automate things. I've done a lot of story maps, which will take spatial maps and help tell a story. So I did a story map on all the Greek merchant ships that were lost in World War II, an interactive map. It took a lot of work, but it allows you to click on a cross, which is a sunken ship, and see details, see who died. Well, part of the reason I did this is the man I'm named after, my paternal grandfather, met his end as a martyr in the Battle of the Atlantic, about 500 miles off the coast of North Carolina. So digital history gives a great deal of power, and I also think as we become a diaspora that is increasingly diffuse, diverse, it is not necessarily concentrated in Greek towns. I think it's quite a powerful way to keep a global story going.
Absolutely.
So I think that digital history and digital solutions will also allow for a seamless discussion between Greece and the diaspora, and more importantly, and this is frankly what the Greek government doesn't want us to do, is to talk to Greeks in Australia, to Greeks in Canada, Greeks in Argentina,
Why do you
Greeks
think
in
that is?
Germany.
Why do you think that is?
I do all of that now. The Greek government wants to control that. And I say that, by the way, as a proud citizen of Greece. But I don't like either governments of mine interfering with my personal business, whether it's our American government or our Greek government. But that's probably too long of a story here.
Okay, I just spilt my tea on my laptop, so I'm hoping that I don't get zapped here or something weird doesn't happen. But I do want to come back to that discussion of technology and what it means for us. I had interviewed a lawyer here from the Boston area, Dimitris Ioannidis, and we were talking about artificial intelligence and Chat GPT. And we recognize that there's a lot of potential for it, but also we've got to be careful. You know, if you do a query right now in Google and you say, what was the first Greek American parade, it's going to tell you it happened in 1936. And I think and you and I know that that's not the case. It's not the first parade. Simple example, right? But it's interesting how quickly history can be misunderstood, misrepresented, and then propagated through. I've actually seen theses that have come by my desk that were built on Google searches, where so I feel really ill about that, but also that organizations stand up and they say, this is our 45th parade or our 28th parade, and when their history actually goes much further back, and it's much more significant and important that we recognize that. So I'm a little concerned. I'd like to pick that discussion up with you another time, but
Of course.
we have about 10 minutes because at 10 o'clock I need to get into the news because I missed it
Yeah,
at
of course.
9 o'clock. But I would love to have you back here.
Yeah,
Why
sure.
is
I'd be thrilled.
why is it important that we consider save our Greek American history?
Well, okay. First of all, because it is a message going forward to people who may be fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th generation, something about their heritage. I mean, we live in a land of assimilation. I think that we're fine with that. We're reconciled to that. But, Americans, and I think particularly now that we're coming on our 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in 2026, we have a responsibility to tell our story as Americans, not just to ourselves. We often are too inward looking in our story. This is a story out to the generations. One initiative that I'm very interested in doing is telling the story of my papu and Nyaya from Patras, as I've told the story of my papu who died in the Battle of the Atlantic, because my papu and Nyaya in Salt Lake City primarily have about 400 descendants, and some of them are completely outside of the culture of the Greek community, which is fine. That's natural. But they ought to know where their surname comes from or who kind of founded their clan, their dynasty. And, those connections are very important. They are markers that I think are becoming more important, particularly as we get more globalized, both as a country and as a world. But it also, if you have reference points, you have a much more likely ability to sustain your community identity. And I think that it's both educating where you were from, out of intellectual curiosity, but I also think that these are markers which will help sustain us going forward, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. It puts us in a continuum, and I think the problem is you probably have seen this where, there's the reporter on the street that holds the microphone up to someone and says, excuse me, ma'am, would you tell us why you're proud to be a Greek American? And they look up and they say, well, Plato and Socrates. And it's just like, but what you said is, I really would like to tell my grandfather's story, and I wish, and I am so glad. That's why I feel we share the same understanding of this. How important it is. Where generations, our history has been passed on by storytelling. And instead, what we do is we inundate, I think, young people with ancient Greece, which is fine, or send them over and have them sit in a cafe on Kolonaki and say, you're Greek, be proud to be Greek. Well, what about proud of your heritage here in America? What did you bring?
Well, that's absolutely right.
What did you bring to the party? Well, I don't know why we're missing that as a community, but it's.
Well, I have a couple. I mean, I can give you the expurgated and short version of that. I think that we have managed a narrative which is simplified both for our consumption, but also for our fellow Americans. It is pride in ancient Greece, basically a gap of 1,800 years of history, which includes some amazing Greek history, Byzantium, which you'd be surprised how much internal resistance in the Greek American community there's been in telling the Byzantine story. And then we're in suspended animation from about 200 BC to 1800. We have a revolution, and then we move to America.
That's right.
And
you're either with Kolokotronis on the horse, or you're wearing a toga and philosophizing. But there's, we've lost so much.
Right, and I honestly think that there needs to be a discussion about that. And again, also even the Greek American story, penniless, uneducated immigrants, and then two generations, doctor, lawyer, engineer, this and that. Now, it's not that that's not true, but as you showed me, I mean, these so-called penniless, illiterate immigrants had a bilingual newspaper in Salt Lake City in 1908.
Isn't that great?
So,
yeah. Really?
Yeah, why not talk about that? Why not talk about the fact that some of the first Greeks in the United States were global diaspora merchants that were among the most sophisticated and powerful business people in the British Empire, in the Austrian Empire, in the Russian Empire.
Yeah, agrivos.
We don't talk about that. We don't talk about New Orleans as a hub of, Greek culture. We talk about, the immigrants arrived in the 1890s. It was rough. I mean, there are so many stories that because they're more subtle, we don't talk about. And I think that at some point it becomes a case of active narrative suppression. And I'm very much against that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be a problem too in our education. Remember, we're a couple generations removed, or I am a couple of generations removed from the world that I grew up in. Is not here anymore. It's a different world. The people are different, and our heritage has slipped away. And I don't think we've prepared the young people to be the caretakers of that heritage, or to really carry it forward. I'm really seriously concerned, and I don't want to speak in absolutes here or in generalizations. It's not healthy. I'm sure my phone's going to ring and say, my son does this, this, this. Yes, I know, but also our newspapers are ending up in the trash, and So I'd like to pick that discussion up at some point, Alex. But I'd like for you to tell us again about your article, because it is available online. You have written a number of articles, but the one in particular that was in a Neo magazine. Would you describe that again so people could find that?
Okay, well, this is I'm talking about the Greeks of Utah. I've done multiple articles, for example, the Greeks of Chicago, the Greeks of the South, Tarpon Springs, New Orleans, in multiple venues. For example, I do a lot of work with Neos Cosmos in Melbourne, Australia, which I have to say I think that's probably the strongest diaspora paper out there, and the Greek Australians, shout out to them. They are strong Greeks, strong Australians, strong intellectuals. But I mean, I've written for any number of outlets. I've written quite passionately about Greek Utah, Greek Chicago, Greeks in the South. I have a particular passion about New Orleans because of its importance in the global Greek story. But no, my article in Neo magazine is about the Greeks of Utah, which I think really needs to be focused on in the next week, because on the 8th of March, which is also International Women's Day, the women in your life, make sure that you take them out for dinner or get them flowers. But on that same day, it's the centennial of a devastating industrial accident, which my friend and colleague Yorgos Anagnostou has written about. But, the story of Greeks in Utah is a real story of triumph, but it's also a story of industrial agitation, of industrial strife, of, feeding bodies to the industrial giant.
Right. Absolutely. It's we're coming up on 10 o'clock, and I was wondering,
Sure.
I'd like to run the news report, and then some words from our sponsors, and then have you back. Could you still stay on until about 10:15? I want to give you the full
I
45.
can. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Excellent.
I owe you that, after all, for my technical problems. I'll just mute myself and wait for it, okay?
Okay.
Oh, by the way,
Yes.
is there a way you can send how this is live streamed so that I can get this across to friends of mine?
Sure, yeah. Right now we're broadcasting on over the internet on WNTN.com. They can just go
Very good.
there and press play, and we're recording the session as well.
Excellent.
Excellent. Thank
Thank you so much.
Okay.
You bet.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest this morning is Alex Billinis. You heard him. He's a fascinating, very interesting person, speaks 7 languages, and holds a number of degrees. And he'll be right back with us right after the news report. You're tuned to Grecian Echoes here on WNTN, 1550 AM in Cambridge, Needham, and Boston, streaming at WNTN.com. And it is Monday with Meleti, and your host, Meleti Pouliopoulos. And we're back with our guest, Alex Billinis, who is joining us this morning by telephone. He was originally from Utah, but is a resident currently of Clemson, South Carolina. And we're actually had about a half an hour with him already. We had discussed his bio, and we will be posting this talk online for those of you for replay in our podcasts. But we want to just highlight that he has a lifelong passion for Byzantium and Balkan history and the history of the Greek and Serbian diasporas, and having lived and worked in Greece, Bulgaria, and Serbia. Welcome back, Alex.
It's good to be back. And again, apologies for my technical absence for the first portion. Let's talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us now, what was it like when you lived and worked overseas? For me, it was a real eye opener because I was getting different news. I was on the ground talking to people and seeing things in a different way, and realized that it wasn't necessarily being reflected in the American media. Was that your experience as well?
Of course, and it's wonderful to have been an American abroad because you learn to appreciate so many things about America. I think, quite honestly, I became much more of an American after 8 years of living abroad, and then also periodic stints beforehand. But I have to say, I enjoyed living as a European, and I am a European. I'm a European citizen. I'm a Greek citizen. It was wonderful. I'm proud of being a Greek. I'm proud of having worn the Greek uniform. I'm also proud of the European idea, and I think that I'm very much an Atlanticist. I mean, I'm caught somewhere in the Atlantic. That's why I love living in South Carolina and having a home on the coast because I'm very rooted in American soil, but I can look across the ocean, at least spiritually, on the land whence my ancestors came. But I think it was very important to have lived over there and to have experienced multiple countries. Greece and Serbia have strong, cultural and religious affinities, but they're also very different. And then, of course, the UK was a wonderful experience because as Americans, we're all, in a sense, descendants of Britain. I know that sometimes people don't like to hear that, but I think that our institutions, the very language that we're most comfortable expressing ourselves in, is English. So it was wonderful. It was wonderful to be able to get on my bike in central London and ride over to where the first ships went to Jamestown.
Oh,
The
that's wonderful.
connection,
Yeah.
yeah, the connection with your country. It's very important. So I'm grateful for having had that opportunity, and I do impart that to my students, the importance of studying abroad. I regret I've not been to places in Asia except for Asia Minor. I've only been to one place in Africa. I did live in Chile for a while. I worked in a law firm down there, so I had a little bit of an experience in Latin America. But certainly, my global experience is much more Atlantic oriented. But I think it's important, particularly since the vast majority of American history has been with a focus on the Atlantic. And now, as a historian, I'm very much an Americanist, but I can't help to think that to some degree I see America with the eyes of a European.
Now, when did you go for your dual citizenship? Was it while you were working overseas or before that?
No, it was before that. I think it was in my mid-20s that I went through the process, and anything having to do with the Greek bureaucracy is pretty excruciating.
Not much has
But
changed there.
yeah, yeah. Well, I hear that there has been a degree of digitization, so that's good. But yes, so I have Greek nationality, and my kids have Greek nationality. We have what we call an οικογενειακή merida in Greece. So it's definitely part of my identity, and obviously when I moved back to Greece, that came with a short stint of military service, which again, that's what the law provides, and that's fine. That's good.
Does that extend to your son now? I never knew that.
It does.
It
It
does.
does.
Okay.
Depending on whether or not you're a permanent resident abroad. And as we're residents abroad, it doesn't extend. But when I repatriated to Greece, I was not a resident abroad, and that's what the law says. So that's what you do.
Right.
And I think that the Greek military has an incredible tradition. I'm very proud of the Greek military. I think that it has a heroic record, and I'm also very happy that Greece and the United States have always been on the same side. And by the way, that's another part of the narrative that's forgotten, that the first time Marines went ashore in Derna, in the Barbary state,
Right.
there were Greeks with them. There are so many stories that we forget about. We forget about, the Americans who fought and died for Greek independence. Washington's nephew is buried on my island.
Is that right? Is that right?
Yes.
What?
Yes.
What?
So
What?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm curious. Why do you think that it seems to me this would be the perfect time to have kind of a rebirth in our and an understanding about our Greek American history now that this is, I guess, according to one person's post on Facebook, Greek American Heritage Month. Why wouldn't we be celebrating the heroes that fought? And that died in the wars, and and celebrate their lives here and their contributions to American society. Why isn't that being taught? Why aren't we celebrating that right now?
Well, I would say that you are, I am, people I work with, colleagues of mine do. I think that there is a simplification of the story. I mean, forgive me for saying this because it is provocative, but we've allowed Gus Portokalos to be our spokesperson. We want a simplified story. The jovial restaurateur hearkening back to ancient Greece.
Right. There's a lot of that. Right. It
is, in my opinion, it's highly disrespectful, first of all, to the very diner person that is being satirized, but it's also a disrespect to the huge synechia of Hellenismo, of Romiosini. Even if we just take the American part, it does a huge disservice. But if you look at the relationships between Greece and the United States, there are so many. But again, I think that there is a preference for a simplified narrative. I don't want to really go into why there's this preference because I'm speculating. But the fact is there is incredible diversity in the Greek American story. There were Greeks, particularly Hydriots, coming to the U.S., and I've read this in the Hydra archives this summer. In the early 1800s, I had the great pleasure of meeting a descendant of probably the oldest Greek-American family in the United States, a fellow Hydriot.
No kidding.
Is a member. What's that?
No kidding. This is interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Who is a member of Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church in New Orleans, the oldest church in the United States, the oldest Orthodox church, because, yes, the Russians did establish churches in Alaska, but that was before the U.S. took over Alaska. The oldest church in the United States is Holy Trinity in New Orleans. And by the way, it was a multi-ethnic church. The founders were Greeks and Serbians. Last summer, my wife and I walked by the site of the old church. Right. We walked by what was a Greek neighborhood then. I mean, this is ground zero of American Orthodoxy, and it is literally ignored.
Well, it is ignored, and I'm sure you've read the writings of Steve Frangos, who had done a wonderful article on that particular church and that community, and there's other scholars who have written about it. And you're right, our history, what are we to be proud of? Do you have a Greek parade down there, by the way, a Greek Independence Day parade?
We don't. I mean, we have a wonderful church the in Greenville. An absolutely wonderful church, wonderful people. It's not a very large community,
Right.
but they're certainly proud of their heritage. We've got a very successful community. One of my closest friends and one of the most welcoming people is the former Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina, Nick Theodore, who is a very young, dynamic 90-something who I have the pleasure of working with on their archives for St. George Greek Orthodox Church.
Oh,
But no,
great.
the answer to that is no, but that does not at all mean that we are not active here. Certainly, I look forward to more, cultural engagement. But I think parades are great, and certainly Tarpon Springs has a great parade, and several very close friends of mine are always active and very ethnically engaged on the west coast of Florida, which, in my opinion, by the way, is the new center of gravity of Hellenism in the United States.
Why would you say that? Why do you feel that? That's interesting.
Oh, well, I could go. I mean, that would be its own discussion. But
Okay.
first of all, you have a town that is heavily Greek populated, Tarpon Springs, with a Greek story.
Yes.
So you get to see Hellenism not with storefront philology like you would see, I don't know, in Greek town of Detroit or in Lincoln Square of Chicago or obviously Astoria, but you get to see a more rural Hellenism. I think of the Cretan house there, where it's outside. You have a little chapel, and of course the Cretans will have their dances, will have their barbecues, and it feels like being in Greece. And then, of course, you have the Chicago diaspora, so all the Chicagoans leaving Chicago who've moved down there, but you've also got the northeastern diaspora. You've got a lot of people who come directly from Greece. Florida is now the third largest state. It's one of the largest economies on earth. Lots of tech ecosystems, particularly in Orlando. I mean, this is the story that we're not talking about, that we have to talk about. And I just don't understand why we don't. I mean, it's shooting ourselves in the foot because we have so much to contribute to the American story.
Well, if we don't, yes, we do. And if we don't write that piece, if we don't save our artifacts, who's writing the story? Who's carrying the narrative? I mean, we were represented pre-World War II in many cases in the media as, being greasy Greeks, low-class people. They were fighting in the streets, and a lot of the articles that survived in the mainstream media portrayed us in a negative way, and it missed a lot of the history, a lot of our contributions. And now I want to take you for one final question. And it's because I think you have a nice way of speaking, and I admire that you're writing and that you're lecturing in particular, but you're a research scholar and you continue. It's continuous education. And I think just getting in front of the young people is so important. I recently was introduced to a social media influencer. And for those of people that are listening that don't know what that is, it means that there are people who spend a lot of time on the computer and in social media doing something or rather that seems to be popular. And they get a following, and then they can promote products or do whatever they'd like. They are influencing huge masses of people. And so this person happens to be a Greek American, and I sat down with him, and after looking at what he was doing, and I told him about this, what we're talking about here, about this lost history. And I said, can you find a way to somehow tell these stories, to somehow talk about our Greek American heritage and put it in little TikTok videos or whatever you do? And he said, well, you tell me. And I said, no, you know your audience. So, and then I challenged him. I said, what you're doing is you're circulating the same photos, the same stories that have been told over and over and over. And why is the measurement that, oh, look, I've got 400,000 views on this story or picture when it's been shown 400,000 times? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How do we reach the young people? We're certainly our generation. There are a lot of people right now that are saying, will you please go back to the music? Uh,
Yeah,
so
of course.
how is it? How do we reach the younger people?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to engage people like this individual that you're talking about. I taught a seminar last semester called Social Media is Culture. And I didn't come up with the name for the class. A student of mine did. Look, we have to engage the young people. We have to make this relevant. To be honest with you, when I see most Greek organizations, they're Gerousias. I mean, they have the same average age as the U.S. Senate or the current contenders for president.
Right.
They're not going to make it relevant. You need to find individuals who understand the relevance, and that's why I'm so honored to teach, because I get to hear what's important. But so I do think we need to do that, because currently, if you look at any of the Greek organizations, and which will remain nameless, they don't have real youth outreach. They're not making this relevant.
Right.
It's more about congratulating themselves. I hope that somebody takes my ideas, like this fellow you were talking about, and runs with them.
Me too.
I don't earn any money from this. I'm not interested in that. I am compensated from my job and from my business ventures. This is a labor of love. It's a labor as an Orthodox Christian, as an American, and as a Greek. It's getting the story out there. It's building a tree whose shade. It's planting a seed for a tree whose shade will come after us. That's what the generations before us did. To be honest with you, if I look, I'm a proud Gen Xer, but I look at baby boomers and a lot of us Gen Xers, and we are in a cult of self-congratulation. We have to lose that. We have to lose that. We have to say, here's the baton. Here's some information you should know. You're going to put it in the context that will be disseminatable to people. You need to be convinced of its importance, and then you need to rock and roll.
Right. I mean, we need the Greek media to stand up. We need the leaders of the community to reinvent themselves and their organizations and to make Greek American heritage a priority. And on some level, that there has to be some historical savings, teaching, celebrating, so that we can relay that to our future generations. Alex, I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning. It was very stimulating. I hope it was for the listeners as well. I'm sure we'll hear from them. And,
I'm sure we will.
Yeah, and I hope that you'll come back sometime to join us here on Grecian Echoes.
Well, that depends on you and obviously on the listeners. But, obviously it's a pleasure. And, thank you for all you're doing. You are an unsung hero. And
thank you. That was very nice. Thank you.
It's very important what you do.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a great day.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.